Good day. Welcome to another edition of Ibimamungo's Perspective on Global Affairs. Before I continue, I urge you to please press the like button so that we can get the algorithm going. And if you're new to my channel, I urge you to subscribe. Today, I have a different question. And that question has to do with Ukraine and the weapon systems that has been approved to be given to the Ukrainians. So my question is this: do you think the Tomahawk missile will be a game changer for the Ukrainians in their war with the Russians? Will this weapon system be able to do significant damage, harm, and destruction to the Russians to the extent that it will bring the Russians to the negotiating table? At least that's what some Zelensky thinks, and that's what the coalition of the willing, who have been supporting him and urging him to press upon President Trump to give him this weapon system. If you think it will, whatever position you think, whatever is your thought, please put it in the comment section. But here's my thought. I have seen over the course of the past 3 years, different strands of weaponry being given to the Ukrainians. We heard about the Abrams tank, we saw the Challenger and the Leopard tanks, we saw all the missile systems, the Scalp, the Storm Shadow. The only one that was held up from being given to them was the German system, the Taurus. But they also got the ATACMS, they got the HIMARS. They've been getting different grades of weaponry. And they even went ahead and also got, after a long campaign, very odious campaign, very stringent and pressure-filled campaign, they got the F-16s. Unfortunately, we don't see these weapon systems in the war anymore. It so turns out this war has a new star. And that star are the drones, the FVP drones, and all the different suites of drones that in the battlefields across the contact line, and that also go deep into the various countries, deep into Russia and deep into Ukraine. So what will the Tomahawk missile bring to the table? It's a devastating weapon. At least it has a range of 1,500 kilometers, if not more. And today it emerged that the Pentagon has given the green light to transfer Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine. The final decision, though, still rests with Donald Trump. It was CNN that was making this report. According to the assessment of the U.S. Department of War, providing these cruise missiles will not reduce the defensive capability of the Americans, of the United States, because that's one of the excuses that President Trump gave when he held off giving up this equipment to the Ukrainians. He said that the weapons, the inventory of American weapons stockholding was they needed to look into it, and they felt it was low. We should remember America has expended a lot, given a lot to the Ukrainians over the course of these past 2 years, especially under the Biden administration. And they did a lot in supporting the Israelis in their war with Iran. So they are looking into their inventory. Besides that, they also have a vast array of bases all over the world and conflict zones where they may need this equipment. So, but they've determined that they have enough in their stockholding. We should remember that it's Raytheon that produces this particular equipment, and Raytheon has assured them. But today was a very good day. We got a lot of revelations as to the potency of and the successes of the Ukrainian state over the past few years, at least this year. Because what happened was Zelensky had a meeting with his security team and he got some briefing. One of the most shocking of all this is that the Ukrainians were able to destroy a battery of the Oreshnik, but they kept it quiet and mum. It's very uncharacteristic of the Ukrainians to have successes such as that and not say much about it. After all, we saw them, how they made us all see in live in real time, their Operation Spiderweb when they were attacking the strategic bombing fleet of the Ukrainians, of the Russians deep inside Siberia in Russia. We watched it almost in live. We even saw that the Defense War Secretary in America also sat down and watched it. He had a ringside view of what was going on. So they tend to advertise and use their successes for propaganda purposes, at least, to show that they are really in the fight of it. So today it emerged that they've done quite a lot. President Zelensky met with his team. He met with his security team, and one of it is that we now learned that the Ukraine's SBU conducted over 160 successful strikes on Russian oil facilities. That is not a lie. We've seen quite a lot of them burning since January, causing 20% fuel deficit and export ban, destroyed 48% of the Panzer system and one Oreshnik complex at Kapustin Yar. The SBU chief, Malyuk, told President Zelensky. President Zelensky had this meeting, and one of the things that came out of the meeting was that he had to reveal what was going on in Pokrovsk, and he actually said that the Pokrosk campaign is difficult. The word he used is that it's difficult, but that it is by no means something that they cannot handle. But he did acknowledge that it's difficult. He said that but one other thing too he said is that he heard that, and he did say that even though it's difficult, it is under control. And concerning President Putin's offer to send journalists or allow journalists, have a ceasefire so that journalists can go and see the situation in Pokrovsk for themselves, where, as the Russians say, 5,000 soldiers of the Ukrainians are now encircled. He said if they're watching him, if Putin wants to go to the battlefield, he can very much go. If he wants to come to Pokrovsk, he can go ahead. We know how that will end. In other words, if Putin goes to Pokrovsk, he will be attacked. So there was a lot of talk today, and it was a meeting where President Zelensky was trying to find partners, as he says. He calls them partners, to put a spotlight on the whole supply chain for the Oreshnik missile. He says he actually said that the Oreshnik, there are only three produced, and that they destroyed one, and the Belarusians will be getting 6 soon. So they seem to, the intelligence of Ukraine does seem to have a hand and a grip on what is going on in that particular part of the Russian development of that particular weapons system. So this is Zelensky here now in a meeting with his team. It says, today I coordinated the main direction of our further sanction efforts. These include sanctions of our partners, for which we provide our proposals, our own sanctions, which in many ways align with those of other European countries, and our long-range sanctions, which take effect direct and most swiftly. First, a significant number of Russian enterprises involved in the production of missiles and other weapons are still not under global sanctions. We'll fix that. Second, I gave instructions to step up cooperation with partners to synchronize the sanctions already in place. Cumulatively, effect of sanctions has the greatest impact. Well, this meeting he had with, we can see the foreign minister there, we can see the head of the SBU there and all that. So he had a very important meeting, and it was one where all these revelations were put to us there, that the Ukrainians are doing very well. They're holding their own in Pokrovsk, and they don't have to worry. Pokrovsk won't fall. But we do know that the Russians have held Pokrovsk in a pincer. They practically have encircled it, and it is a very, very difficult time now for the Ukrainians down there. And one of the things that came out of today's meeting, or to all the goings on in Pokrosk, around the Pokrosk area, is that we got to know that the Russians are now stepping up. The Ukrainians tried to send in 12 commandos. They had an helicopter, lift them there, drop them off, and they went to try and they have this reconnaissance, REG groups. They send them ahead. Their commandos are sent ahead to try and embed themselves within that and called sabotage. They're called sabotage groups, sabotage and reconnaissance group. And unfortunately for them, the Ukrainians, they were dropped off by a helicopter in the night. The Russians identified them, And at last count, they practically killed all 12 of them. They identified them, attacked them with drones, and published it. Published it because the drones they have thermal cameras, and they're able to see, they saw the landing with the helicopter, there are images of it. They posted it on videos, and this is how we see this war now. All 12 were identified and killed. It is that says that they have fire control, because they did leave one access point open. And that access point is one that the Ukrainians have tried to make a breakthrough and a run for it, but they have fire control over that particular stretch of land, complete fire control with their drones, and every single vehicle, armored vehicle or person or soldier who goes to that place, it's called a kill zone. They get killed. That's what has been happening. Anyway, information also came that Budunov, the head of military intelligence for the Ukrainians, is now in Pokrovsk trying to coordinate. The Pokrovsk issue is a big one for them, and they're really worried about it. Pokrovsk and Kupiansk, Konstantinovka too, and Siversk. We hear now that the Russians are moving in slowly into the outer fringes and outer reaches of these cities, city limits, outer city limits, and these are the final days. Something has happened. The Russians have stepped up, and they have put their legs very, they've moved a tad higher in their gear, and they are pressing the gas pedal now somehow in this campaign. Maybe because it is getting to winter and they may want to have some accomplishments. President Zelensky was saying that as far as he's concerned, the Russians have lost in the Pokrosk campaign because they had hoped that they would have rounded up this Pokrosk campaign by the 15th of October, and that didn't happen. Anyway, the Pokrosk campaign is going on, and one of the things that happened today is that the Russians carried out a very brutal attack on Pokrosk. Apart from the killing of all those soldiers, they also carried out an airstrike to try and disable the logistics. The Russian Air Force has strung a bridge in the Dnipro-Pokrovsk region as part of its effort to disrupt Ukrainian military logistics in the area, the Defense Ministry said on Friday. It also published a video that it says or shows the target being hit. The motorway bridge crossing the Volchaya River allegedly served as a key supply line for the Ukrainian forces in the nearby town of Pokrovskoye, located in the eastern part of the Pokrovsk. I have an image of that particular incident. It's one of the things the Russians do now. Everybody does this. When you have a success, you show your own success. And this is the success of how they blew up this particular bridge. They used fab bombs, and it completely blew it up. It's destroyed. So this is the kind of war we're seeing now. It's a war where it's every single part of it is visual, and they have a whole suite of mapping agencies, mapping channels, Telegram channels, YouTube channels that show how the war is progressing. It is a very, very well followed war. Nobody can say, one person can say one thing, but the whole world is saying another thing. You can't lie about this war. It is out there just for anybody who wants to get the information. But no doubt about it, the coalition of the willing is doing all it can to help Ukraine. And one of the things that came out today is that while the Ukrainians have gotten approval for their Tomahawk, waiting on President Trump was very emphatic that he wasn't going to approve that an exemption for the Hungarians. The Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán has been saying the coalition of the willing has a big hand in the continuation of this war. They have an interest in it continuing. And for that reason, this war is going to continue. And this war they are doing everything to scuttle the peace moves by President Trump and President Putin. In fact, today it emerged that particular peace talk has finally been cancelled. It says that the meeting between President Trump has been cancelled. President Trump and President Putin have been cancelled, and it will not be happening in Budapest anymore. The reasons is that the Russians, from what I gather, is that in fact, it was the Russians that even sent a note to the Americans that they are not interested in that particular meeting anymore because they are very far off from understanding each other. The Americans have started to talk, President Trump has started to talk about ceasefire, free zone of the war along the current contact line, while the Russians continue to emphasize and insist on one, clear agreements that Ukraine will not join an alliance, recognition of the 4 oblasts that have been taken, recognition of the Russian language and the Russian Orthodox Church, and also demilitarization of Ukraine. They have and they have not moved away from it. And this was what caused conflict between Marco Rubio and Sergei Lavrov when they had a meeting to iron out the details of the Budapest meeting. But if you ask me, President Trump is just responding to political goings on in the domestic field. This is a time where he's not in a strong position, as I've always said. There's a shutdown, there's horse trading going on in Congress, and those supporters of Ukraine in Congress, no less a person like Lindsey Graham, Richard Blumenthal, and the whole of a large number of the senators in both parties, bipartisan support for the Ukrainian cause, bipartisan support for war wherever it is taking place, has led to the point where President Trump has had to step back from all attempts to make peace with President Putin, especially as it continues to be shown that President Putin and the Russian state is not changing their own standpoint. Anyway, so President Orbán will not be getting any gas. He will not be exempted from the sanctions on Rosneft and Lukoil. That's what President Trump said, and President Trump also said emphatically that he wouldn't be meeting with him. So we now see this situation where, one, the meeting has been cancelled. Two, the Ukrainians have said that they're not going to, the situation in Pokrosk is hard, but it's under control. What does that mean? It simply means that President Zelensky has abandoned the soldiers in Pokrovsk to their fate. Whatever it is they're going to do to try to get them out is just not going to succeed, because we remember that there has been other instances where the Ukrainians have been encircled in Avdiivka, in Bakhmut, in Ugledar, and all these other cities where they had fought very, very brutal wars. They were even encircled in Mariupol, and they had to surrender. But this time around, they're told not to surrender, and they are told to keep fighting on. The Russians too have also changed their rhetoric. The Russians have said they are not going to hold them on as prisoners of war. They are going to go in and destroy the Ukrainian soldiers. We have a few bloody days ahead in this Pokrovsk campaign. Same thing is going on in Kupiansk, but the emphasis is on Pokrovsk and the defiance of Zelensky and his team and all. Anyway, today, something very, Maria Zakharova, the spokeswoman of the Russians as regards to the foreign ministry, said something very, that we all know. An incurable disease. Russia, and she said that the British have an incurable disease, Russophobia, and a colonial mindset. Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova responded to a new revelation by British journalist Kit Clarenberg about MI6 past support for Nazi collaborators after World War II. It so emerged, and you saw it happens. It's not new. Everybody knows that. Immediately after the Second World War, there was a new adversary. Instantly, the one who helped them win the Eastern Front, which is the Soviet Union, so happened to be communist. And communism is very, very abhorrent to the Western capitalist class, where individual wealth is very, very coveted over collective wealth. It was just not the kind of ally they wanted, and instantly they started to gather the Nazi collaborators. The Nazis, the ones who fought against the Soviets, they had also that tendency to not like the Soviets, So they were recruited en masse by both the CIA and the MI6. Of course, we know their role in ultimately that they played in NATO and also in the American space program and so many other things. They have consistently had a very big voice in foreign policy in America and indeed in the West. So Keith Clarenberg was just saying, talking about how MI6 passed support for Nazi collaborators in World War II. Zakharov said that the British political class suffer from an incurable disease, a deep-rooted Russophobia that continues to shape its foreign policy. Those people who may be on the other side of the divide, that side of the divide that is not reached by the BBC and the CNN and the MNBC and all these other narrative-shaping legacy media, will very much identify with what she is saying. It's also been said a lot by some of the biggest commentators in the alternative media space on YouTube and X and all these other channels. No less a person than Tucker Carlson also says it, Jeffrey Sachs, John Meishelman. We hear this in most of their videos and all the things all the time. It's not so, but the ones who are perpetrating this strategy and these policies do not believe so. They believe the Russians should be eliminated. Anyway, she accused London of maintaining the same neo-colonial mindset and destructive tactics, from arming neo-Nazi elements in Ukraine to spreading misinformation and disinformation, sponsoring acts of sabotage against Russia. The spokesperson also warned that Britain's intelligence service have a long history of using their allies as disposable tools in their confrontation with Moscow. That's not far from the truth. One of the problems with countries like Ukraine and countries where the MI6 has had such great successes is that sanctions and poverty and corruption tend to make a lot of people sell their soul, and there are a lot of people who are very easy to buy over. Many times they're not doing it for ideology, they're doing it for the fact that they need to feed their family. We saw how the whole military class in the Assad government was just bought over. They just dropped their guns and they were not ready to fight. It was a long operation. The complete emasculation of the Syrian state and Syrian economy had left everybody impoverished. They didn't have the will and the power to continue a fight that they were not going to benefit from. So they just laid their arms, wore civilian clothes, and just frittered away from the battlefields and allowed al-Shara's militants to overrun Assad's government. 40,000 people overrunning an army of 200,000. That's the kind of mathematics we see these days. But it had a lot to do with the fact that the MI6, the CIA, and the Mossad are very powerful in convincing and bribing people in such states. Anyway, the ongoing war and all the geopolitical implications it has, the one that has pitted the West completely on one side, and the Russians and all the supporters of Russia, especially those who buy and support the Russian economy, those who buy oil, those who trade with Russia, a vast majority of the southern countries in the BRICS countries, in all these other institutions continue to do business with Russia, and we see how that has made Russia to be resilient and to continue to stand its ground in this war. Anyway, as that region is continuing, Europe is carrying on with its back and forth. America's neighbor up north has decided that America has turned to not a reliable partner. In the way Trump looks at it, Canada has been cheating and getting the best out of America for several years. And in the way Canada looks at it, they've had a very cozy and comfortable relationship for several years. They've been part of the Western Alliance. And this fracturing of the Western alliance by the Trump administration is one that has caused so much disquiet, especially as it now talks about making Canada the 51st state. It really is intent on it. But we should understand one thing. We may know Britain as being a small island, but Britain is still a big empire. They may have lost India and may have lost their dominion in Hong Kong and so many other places, but they still have extensive country. The Queen is on the stamp of so many countries. Now the King, King Charles III, is on the stamp of so many countries. And one of that, two of those countries are two of the most resource-rich countries on earth, Australia and Canada. It's not by happenstance that the Prime Minister of Canada was the central bank of both Canada and the central bank leader, the person leading the central banks of in both Canada and eventually in Britain, in United Kingdom, before he came to become the Prime Minister. He has banking deep in his root, just as Mets has asset management also in his root, financial services. These are the people ruling the world now. So Carney is a custodian babysitting the interest of the British Empire in Canada. And now that Trump is trying to break the hold of the British Empire in the globalist agenda, the liberal economy, the climate agenda, all these other agendas that are associated with globalization, that's one that is now being pushed back or against by President Trump and all the nationalist leadership we see all across Europe. Canada is looking east now to find new friends and find new markets. And when you go looking for new friends, you tend to be a little bit more humble. When they are in their alliances, G7, G20, G-Days, all those alliances, they talk down on every other person. But in this particular reality now, Carney has gone and is selling Canada to the countries of ASEAN. He had bilaterals in the ASEAN conference, and now he's at the APEC conference where he's also meeting with, telling all the countries of the region that they will do well with the vast amount of resources that Canada has in oil and in rare earth and in so many other minerals. Canada is very rich, very rich. And now they're looking for new markets and looking for new partners in Asia. They're looking east also. Canada has joined the Looking East committee. Looking East was a policy that was incorporated by Putin in February of 2022. He went to the Beijing Olympics and came to the conclusion that 300 years of trying to be members of the Western Alliance has run its course. The West didn't want them after 30 years of the fall of the Soviet Union, so it was now time to look east. Relationship with China particularly and India, most notably, has helped save their economy at the time that the West. So now that Donald Trump is no more a friend of the Canadians are actively looking east. They've joined the Looking East quest. And Prime Minister Carney did something very special today. He did something that President Putin did 3 years before him. He met with President Xi Jinping in South Korea, where they're having the meeting for the APEC meeting there. Xi Jinping and I, he put out a tweet where he said, Xi Jinping and I today at the APEC summit, marking a turning point in the bilateral relationship between China and Canada. We are committed to renewing relationship in a pragmatic and constructive way. We each directed our officials to resolve outstanding trade issues and irritants, and we look forward to making progress on these issues as we strengthen the ties. Under Justin Trudeau was doing everything and they were all part of the Western Bloc then, and at that time, China was the enemy. In the first Trump administration, they banned Huawei, Trump banned Huawei, And when he banned Huawei and put Huawei under so many sanctions under the entity list, one of the things he requested of Canada was to arrest the daughter of the owner of Huawei. They did that, and that fractured the relationship between Canada and China. Beyond that, also, Biden put 100% tax tariff on Chinese electric vehicles. You won't find one single Chinese electric vehicle in America. You won't find a Huawei phone in America. You won't find some preeminent Chinese consumer products in America. And in putting those tariffs, Justin Trudeau and his Canadian administration also mirrored the tariffs, and that had ruined a lot of relationship. The Canadians have a large Chinese population. They had good trade with the Chinese because the Chinese are insatiable when it comes to things like oil and things like iron ore or any kind of ore at all, be it copper or be it aluminum. And these are all things that Canada and Australia are very wealthy. Australia being close to China has been the biggest beneficiary. The 30 years of unparalleled growth has had a lot to do with the fact that they were selling this to the Chinese. So Carney is talking about how they will now start to improve that relationship and all. In that same meeting also, President Xi Jinping always proposing better win-win corporations for the world. He was talking to the participants at the APEC summit, and then he put forward a 5-point proposal for promoting a universal, beneficial, inclusive economic globalization and building an Asia-Pacific Community Association of Asia-Pacific Corporation. That is the APEC. Yes, win-win, people-to-people integration. China is having a roaring time, and diplomacy is the means by which they are making sure that we should remember that one of the things that made the British Empire very and the European Empire very destructive was that they were very competitive, and they divided their regions and held those regions, and those regions were captive market for their products. As regards to the Chinese somehow have used other means, and they sell to the Germans, the Russians, they sell all across all markets. They don't have to have captive markets. They don't go where you don't want them, like in America, but they do very well in Africa, in Latin America, and all these other places. So Xi Jinping called for joint effort to safeguard the multilateral trading system, build an open regional economic environment, maintain the stability and smooth flow of industrial and supply chains, promote digitalization and greening of trade. Well, it's a very lofty and noble one, and we hope that it ends up in a good thing. I have one story here that I want to run, and that's a story that has to do with, I can't find it here now, but Donald Trump has called out about the Christian community in Nigeria. It's always a very good thing for any country when America never remembers you. Nigeria has been doing a very roaring business of not being remembered by President Donald Trump. But recently, I think today, he put out a tweet, and that tweet showed that he has finally remembered Nigeria. And that tweet has to do with the fact that he believes that Christians are being persecuted in Nigeria. There's I have it here, and maybe I should share it. It's you don't get Nigeria a lot in American news. It's unfortunate for Nigeria. Anytime Nigeria gets into American news, it's usually propagandized news. But now we see that he's having this thing where he's advocating for Christians in Nigeria, and he's saying that they are being killed to a large extent. Most times, Nigeria has been one of the countries that have sort of like stood for its sovereignty. America has tried to do quite a lot with Nigeria. They've tried to send refugees to Nigeria, but Nigerians wouldn't take those refugees. They've tried to also, I hope this is, yes, I hope this is the visual I want. Yes, this is it. Americans have tried to do quite a lot in Nigeria there that our Nigerian government has pushed back against. But Nigerian government has been building its relationship with China and Russia particularly. They've stayed very clear of building a big relationship with America, and America has not been able to impose anything. They pushed back against trying to send refugees from immigrants to Nigeria. So this came out. Christians facing an existential threat in Nigeria. Thousands of Christians are being killed. Radical Islamists are responsible for this mass slaughter, and hereby making Nigeria a country of particular concern. That is at least, but that is the least of it. When Christians of any such group is slaughtered like it's happening in Nigeria, 3,100 versus 4,400, something must be done. I am asking Congress it just goes on and says that he has opened an investigation. They should investigate and give him a report. Like I said, whenever Nigerian comes into the crosshairs of Trump, it's not a good thing. We should remember that Nigeria was one of the countries that was blacklisted by Trump. But unfortunately, something has happened in Nigeria that happened to Trump, that this particular term that made him have a different look of Nigeria. His daughter married a Nigerian Lebanese. And he started to get family members that is Nigerian, advocating for Nigeria in his White House. So this time, he is now doing what he wants to do to try and put pressure on Nigeria. Nigeria has been flying under the radar, doing well. They have a businessman there called Dangote, the richest man in Africa. He has a refinery, 650,000 barrels of oil he produces, built it for almost 19 billion, and he says he's going to spend another 19 billion again to expand it. I think $10 billion to expand it. He's by far the richest black man in the world, and it's that kind of sovereignty, assuring your economic well-being and sovereignty, that is not making the policymakers of America. And one of the things they very much want to do is damage the Nigerian economy again, repeatedly. They've continued to do that to quite a lot of countries. And they will always have co-travelers. They will have people who will come and give congressional reports who would say that Nigeria is a very bad place. Nigeria is bad because they have militancy. They won't tell you that those militants have killed more Muslims than they've killed Christians. The Muslim communities in Sokoto, in Maiduguri, in Kano, in all the Katsina, all the parts or northern parts of Nigeria that have suffered the same fate that came off the bombing of Libya by Barack Obama, the flow of arms into the hands of militants up there in the Sahel, and the destruction of the security systems in all the countries of the Sahel and all to northern Nigeria will not be mentioned. They will just say that Christians are being killed. They will not look to the deeper complication of erosion of your currency, erosion of your economy, and ultimately debasement of your sovereignty. We shall see them soon in Washington, D.C., making reports and coming to talk about how they should sanction Nigeria and destroy Nigeria. Unfortunately, to a large extent, it's Nigerians who end up doing, and Africans who end up doing harm to their own countries. This is where I end my show for today. If you are new to my channel, please subscribe. If you have any views regarding my opinions I just expressed, please put them in the comment section. Do well to like and share. Until I see you in my next video. You have a good day.